If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying these stories, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HassidicStory.com. HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. Shalom Aleichem, my sweetest friends. Another week, another pair of Chassidic stories, Be'ezrat Hashem. But before we begin, as has been my custom for quite a long time now, I'm dedicating this episode to the success of our soldiers in battle wherever they are. And Be'ezrat Hashem, they should be successful in defeating our enemies and allowing us to live in peace. The returning of all the hostages safe, whole, and complete and healthy. The refuah shlema, the full recovery of everybody who's been injured or is sick. The comforting of those who lost loved ones, and the continued unity of the Jewish people all around the world and here in the land of Israel. You know, Shavuot is coming up. We just had Lag BaOmer, and I'm going to, of course, tell a story of the Baal Shem Tov around Shavuot time because it's, of course, his yard site on Shavuot. And as I was looking for stories, I came across so many, I couldn't help myself but tell a Baal Shem Tov story this week. And more to come, Be'ezrat Hashem. It was winter. It was freezing cold and even raining in Mezhibuz in Ukraine. But that didn't stop Velvel from insisting that the Baal Shem Tov answer the door. He was standing on a chair next to the Baal Shem Tov's room, tapping on the window, saying, "Rebbe, open up, open up." And he kept knocking on the window until the Baal Shem Tov would open up and talk with him. What did Reb Velvel want to know so bad that he was willing to suffer in the terrible weather and to bother the Baal Shem Tov? He had learned the whole Talmud, backwards and forwards, and had practically memorized every page. And eventually he got into learning Kabbalah, and the deeper he got into Kabbalah, the more he wanted to know the practical secrets of how to access, in this world, the power of Kabbalah. And he knew the Baal Shem Tov knew the secret of understanding the speech of the birds, and Reb Velvel also wanted to. Now, it wasn't just that Reb Velvel had learned so much. Reb Velvel was also a very successful businessman. He had a huge mansion with servants, and he was a trader with many ships that traveled all around Europe and even to India and the Middle East. And having so much wealth and so much Torah knowledge, he felt it was only natural to go to the next level and be almost on the level of a Rebbe, someone that could understand the speech of the birds. And unfortunately, Reb Velvel's ego had gone a little too far. And being a Torah scholar and being so wealthy, he really thought that he was kind of better than everyone else. And he would say, "Don't I deserve to know the mysteries of the universe? Don't I deserve to know secrets like understanding what the birds are saying?" And so there was Reb Velvel banging on the Baal Shem Tov's window on a freezing cold winter day. And the Baal Shem Tov finally opens the window. And he says, "Velvel, I told you, please. This is not for you. Just because you feel like you want to know what the birds have to say doesn't mean that you should know. Now I'm telling you it's for your own sake. Please, it's only going to cause you harm. Now leave me alone. I have a lot to do." And Velvel insisted. He said, "Rebbe, I have to know the secret." And the Baal Shem Tov says, "Velvel, just forget about it and be a simple Jew. That's the real avodah. That's the real work. You don't have to know secrets of Kabbalah. Just follow the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish code of law, and do what you're supposed to in the simplest way." But Reb Velvel, he wouldn't give up. He was persistent, and he thought the Baal Shem Tov was holding back secrets, maybe because he was jealous of Velvel's wealth or his Torah learning. Maybe he was just being selfish and keeping the secrets to himself. And so he left that time. But he was going to come back and keep bothering the Baal Shem Tov until the Rebbe gave him exactly what he wanted. Now, of course, Reb Velvel didn't realize that the Baal Shem Tov wasn't interested in keeping secrets just because he would be jealous of Velvel's wealth or Torah learning or being selfish. If the Baal Shem Tov didn't want to teach Velvel how to understand how the birds speak, then he was doing it for his own good. And once again, a few days later, Velvel is back, banging on the window, bothering the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov opens the window and he says, "Listen, Velvel, this is your last chance. I'm telling you right now that it's not for you. But if you insist, I will teach you how to understand what the birds are saying. And then it's up to you, because I've warned you. Velvel says, Rebbe, I am ready. I am ready and willing. Please teach me how to understand what the birds are saying. So the Baal Shem Tov brought him in. The two of them sat and learned the higher levels of Kabbalah and secrets that I don't know myself, and if I did, I couldn't reveal. And Velvel was very quick to pick it up, and within a month, he completely mastered the skill of understanding what the birds say. And the Baal Shem Tov told him, before you go out into the forest and try to listen to the birds, you need to fast and pray for an entire week, only eating in the evening. And then you go to the mikveh, and then you go into the forest, and you can listen to the birds. And so he did, fasted all day, only ate at night, went to the mikveh every day, davened, said Tehillim all day long, and finally when the week was over, he went out into the forest. And every chirp was a word. He could understand what the birds were saying. And within a short amount of time, he could hear what was happening in all parts of the world, what was happening in Russia, what would happen tomorrow in France, who was going to live, who was going to die. And then he heard Reb Velvel's house tomorrow is going to burn down. And he's thinking, wow, Reb Velvel, whoever that is, poor guy. And then he realizes, wait a minute, Reb Velvel, that's me. My house is going to burn down? Oy vey! So he ran out of the forest back to his house and he says, Gewalt, my house is going to burn down. Oy vey! He calls all the servants together and he says to them, I want this house checked 24 hours a day. There is no fire to be lit anywhere in this house. Do you understand? And the servants got it. And one of the old maids, by mistake, she left a candle burning in her room at night. It fell on the carpet while she was sleeping. And the servants were able to put out the fire before the whole house caught ablaze. And then Reb Velvel was sitting on his porch, smoking his pipe. And he says, well, the Baal Shem Tov said this wouldn't be good for me. But I just saved myself millions of rubles and valuable documents of all the property I own. Thank God I insisted that the Baal Shem Tov teach me how to understand the birds. Could you imagine what I would have lost if I couldn't? And so he continued his business and his learning. And after a month, he prepares himself again, davening and fasting, and goes to the mikveh. And then he goes out into the forest and he focuses on the Kabbalistic combinations that he learned from the Heilige Baal Shem Tov. And once again, he begins to hear what happened in China, what was going to happen in England, who was going to live and who was going to die. And then it said that Reb Velvel's ships were going to sink in a storm. He couldn't believe it. Once again, the secret of understanding the birds was going to save him. And so he took his carriage and sped off to the docks. All of his trade ships were sitting, filled with merchandise, ready to go out with millions of rubles to buy merchandise from all around the world. And he went to the captain of his ships, and he says, no one is to set sail until I say. The captain says, Velvel, well, you don't understand. We're going to lose a ton of money. We have all kinds of deals. We have deadlines. We have to go pick up the goods and deliver the goods. And Velvel says, not a ship moves until I say so. Is that clear? I don't care how much money you think we're going to lose. No one moves until I say. So the captain says, okay. And he tells all the other captains, nobody goes anywhere until Velvel over here says so. And then Velvel went back home in his carriage. The next day, out of nowhere, there was a huge storm at sea. Many ships, maybe hundreds of them, sunk, but not Velvel's, because Velvel's were still sitting in the port. And now Velvel sat and smoked his pipe on his porch. He smiled again, and he said, a good thing I was insistent and learned the secret of the birds, so that I could save my ships and save my home. And a month later, as had become his custom, he prepared himself again with fasting and davening and mikveh, and went out into the forest. And once again he closed his eyes and meditated on the Kabbalistic permutations of Hashem's name, which allowed him to understand the speaking of the birds. And once again, he hears what would happen in Japan and what would happen in India, who was going to die and who was going to live and who was going to become rich and poor. And then the bird said, and Reb Velvel is going to die next week. And Velvel said, Velvel's going to die? He started sweating. He could barely breathe. He took out his handkerchief and was trying to wipe his brow. He was starting to hyperventilate. Now what was he going to do? It wasn't a matter of saving his house and saving his boats. It had been decreed in heaven that he was going to die. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. So he pulled himself together. He ran to his carriage and sped off to Mezhibuz, to the Heilige Baal Shem Tov. And even though it was freezing cold outside, he was sweating like it was the middle of the summer. A few hours later, he was knocking on the door of the Baal Shem Tov. And one of the Chassidim opens the door and sees Reb Velvel standing there. And he says, "Okay, the Rebbe, just stay here." And the Baal Shem Tov comes walking out and he says to Velvel, "I told you, Velvel, no good was going to come out of this." And Velvel said, "I don't understand, Rebbe. Everything was working out perfectly. I saved my home. I saved my ships. Why would they decree in heaven that I should die, God forbid?" And the Baal Shem Tov said, "You see, you could understand the speaking of the birds, but you couldn't understand the reason in Shemayim, in heaven, for what they were saying. It was decreed in heaven that either you lose half of your fortune or you die. And so it was decided that your home would burn down. You would still keep your ships, and that would only be half of your fortune. Yes, you'd lose the cash in the house, the valuable documents, but you'd still have something. But you saved your house. So then it was decreed that your ships were going to sink, but you saved them too. And since you saved everything, now it's been decreed that you're going to die, because those things didn't happen." And Reb Velvel says, "But Rebbe, what am I supposed to do? I didn't know. I'm sorry, I didn't know." And the Baal Shem Tov said, "I did warn you." Closes his eyes and thinks for a second. And he says, "Well, you can achieve the same effect. You will sell everything and give all of your money to tzedakah and bring yourself to a place of absolute, total poverty, where you'll have to go around and beg for your daily bread. And in heaven, it will be considered as if you're dead, and then you can continue living as a pauper." So Reb Velvel, he realized he didn't have any choice. He wanted to live, and he told his wife and children, "I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to sell everything and go begging." And his wife said, "It's okay. We'll be okay. As long as you're alive, we'll be okay." And he sold everything and gave everything away. It was heartbreaking, but he knew it was either that or the alternative. And for many years, he went around begging. And people even forgot that he used to be a wealthy man. His clothes were torn. He was dirty. Many of his teeth had fallen out. It was a very hard life. And one day, as he's walking from one town to the next, he sits down under a tree to rest. And when he lays down, his head hits something hard. And he feels that there's something buried in the sand. He digs under this tree. What does he discover? A small fortune in a little treasure chest. He opens it up, and it's filled with gold coins from hundreds of years before. Apparently, there were some thieves or somebody who had buried this money. They died a long time ago. And here, by Ashkacha Pratit, by divine intervention, Velvel discovers the money. Immediately, he takes it without spending anything and walks for many weeks until he reaches Mezhibuz and the Heilige Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov, even though Velvel didn't look like himself anymore, he recognizes Velvel right away. Velvel opens up the treasure chest. And he says, "Rebbe, what am I supposed to do with this? I found it in the forest. Clearly Hashem wants me to have it. Can I keep it?" And the Baal Shem Tov once again closes his eyes for a minute. And he says, "Velvel, you will have to give up being able to understand the birds and live as a simple Jew with faith in Hashem." And Velvel says, "Yes, Rebbe, no problem. How do I do that?" And the Baal Shem Tov takes a handkerchief out of his pocket. He waves it in front of Reb Velvel's face. And Reb Velvel realizes that he doesn't remember anymore how to understand the birds speaking. He tries to listen to the birds, but he can't understand anything. And the truth is, from that point on, he had no desire for learning any more Kabbalistic secrets. He was just grateful to be alive and for whatever he had. And the Baal Shem Tov said, "You can keep the money and do with it as you please." And so, Reb Velvel, he came back home to his wife and children, who had also been living in poverty, and told them what had happened. And he took the money and invested it, buying some spices and traveling and trading them in another place. And then he would buy something from one place and trade it in another place. And eventually he was able to hire a small boat that went out and did the trading for him. And eventually he built up his fortune again. And once again he had a fleet of ships, and he had all of his old connections. And he had cleaned himself up, was wearing fancy clothes, unfortunately missing some teeth still. And he built a huge mansion for himself. Of course, he was giving a great deal of tzedakah all the time, having people in his home, giving loans, giving money for whatever anybody needed. And then one night, when the family was sleeping in the house, one of the servants dropped a candle on the carpet, and her room caught on fire. And everybody started yelling, "Quick, get out of the house, there's a fire!" And Velvel woke up his family, and everybody was able to get out of the house on time. People from the town came running with water and sand, wanting to put out the fire. And when they arrived, they saw Velvel dancing for joy. He was literally clapping his hands and saying, "Thank you, Hashem!" Everyone thought he had lost his mind, because most people didn't know the story of Velvel, the old Velvel, and the new one. And when people came and they said, "Can we put out the fire?" He said, "No, chas v'shalom, God forbid. Don't touch the fire." They said, "Velvel, you're losing all of your money. You're losing valuable documents. Who knows what you have in your mansion? You're losing everything." Velvel picked up some sticks from the ground and threw them on the fire, and he's blowing on it, hoping that it'll burn even more. And everyone thought that Velvel had lost his mind. How could a person rejoice when his house was burning down? But Reb Velvel, he just smiled and cried, and he said, "I accept with love all of my troubles and afflictions. Thank you, Hashem, for burning down my house." And the truth is, most of the people didn't understand why Velvel was so happy. But you and I, my sweetest friends, we do. And so sometimes we have real difficulties in life, and we look at our troubles and afflictions, and we say, "Hashem, why can't I know the speaking of the birds? Why can't I know the future so that I could have avoided this?" But if you remember this story, when your house is burning down, B'ezrat Hashem, it shouldn't need to burn down. You will be able to dance and sing and cry and say, "Thank you, Hashem, for my troubles and afflictions," just like Reb Velvel did, the Chassid of the Heilige Baal Shem Tov. I have one more short story for you. There was a group of Chassidim that was in Italy for a week, not so long ago. They were traveling on a private bus on a large highway with many lanes, and this highway rarely had any traffic. So their intention was to pray Mincha, the afternoon prayer, when they returned to their hotel. But as they're traveling, for some strange reason, there was a huge traffic jam on the highway. And the Chassidim were watching the sun setting, and they realized that they wouldn't be able to get to their hotel before sunset. So they told the tour guide they wanted to stop at a nearby gas station and daven mincha. And the tour guide said to them, "Just daven on the bus. What do we need to get off the bus for?" And they said, "Daven on the bus? No chance. We need space. We need to stand up when we're davening. We want to wash our hands first. We want the shaliach tzibor to say the davening out loud. We want to be able to move around." And the tour guide said, "You Hasidim are crazy. Do you know how much anti-Semitism there is here? You know how much people hate Jews here in Italy? If they see a group of Hasidim davening in a gas station, who knows what they would do? They might come over and beat you all up. They might light the bus on fire." But the Hasidim said, "We are beautifying a mitzvah. We are going to daven as proud Jews in public, and we don't care. We know that nothing bad is going to happen to us." So the driver pulls over the bus at a gas station. The Chassidim got off the bus, they wash their hands, they get ready for davening, and they're trying to decide who's going to be the shaliach tzibor, who's going to lead the davening. And then they see a huge motorcycle pulls up right next to them, the big loud engine. The guy on the motorcycle, he's covered in tattoos. He's got a leather vest, a long ponytail. And they thought, oh boy, this is what the tour guide warned us about. Here he's coming to beat us all up. But he pulls off his helmet and he looks at the Chassidic group and he says, Mincha? And they said, yes. And he said, great. And he joined them for Mincha. And at the end of Mincha, he said Kaddish. And obviously he knew how to say Kaddish. So one of the Chassidim said to him afterwards, excuse me, my friend, but the way you look, we never would have imagined that you would know what Mincha or Kaddish is, yet alone be a Jew. And the biker, he said, I grew up in Jerusalem in a Haredi home. And I left Israel, and I left religion, and I left everything. Before my father passed away a few years ago, he asked to speak with me. And he said, I beg you, my son, to put on tefillin every day, and keep Shabbos, and keep kosher. And I've been asking you to do this for years, but it seems like you won't listen to me. So let me ask you one favor before I leave this world, my son. Please, you're my only son. Please say Kaddish for me. And I said to my father, you want me to say Kaddish for you? It's better that I don't say Kaddish for you. I eat pork with this mouth. I curse with this mouth. I'm covered in tattoos. You think you want this mouth saying Kaddish for you? Trust me, it won't do anything for your soul. He said, my father said, it seems like if that's the Kaddish that I'm going to get, a Kaddish from a son that breaks all the mitzvot, then that's the Kaddish that I deserve. All I'm asking you, my son, is once a year on my yard site, once a year, please say Kaddish for me. So I said to my father, okay, once a year I'll say Kaddish for you. And since he passed away, each year on his yard site, I say Kaddish for him. But today I was planning a long trip of traveling from where I live in Italy to 700 kilometers away. And in the middle of my ride, I realized that today is my father's yard site. But I'm on the road in Italy in the middle of nowhere. And I know there's no shul anywhere where we are. And there's no minion and no place for me to say Kaddish. And as I'm riding my bike, I said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Master of the world, if you want me to say Kaddish for my father, you make sure that I have a minion. If I see a minion, I'll know it's a sign from God that I was meant to say Kaddish. If my Kaddish is worth anything, I'll find a minion. But if my Kaddish is worthless, like I told my father it is, then I won't. And I figured, there's no chance in the world I'm going to find a minion for Mincha before the sun sets. And as I'm riding my bike and the sun is setting, I understood that my Kaddish was worth nothing, like I always believed. And then all of a sudden, I see in the distance there's a group of Chassidim standing outside at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, getting ready to daven Mincha. My heart jumped out. I said, there is a God. Hashem wants me to say Kaddish for my father. And Hashem is telling me that my Kaddish, even though it comes from this mouth, is worth so much. And so the Chassid said to this biker, obviously, that's why there was a traffic jam out of nowhere in the middle of Italy, so that a bunch of Chassidim who are not scared of anti-Semites and would do anything to pray the best mincha that they could, got off their bus and stood here waiting for you. And they all shook hands. And before this biker left, one of the Chassidim said, you see how much Hashem loves you? Even though you eat pork and curse and have tattoos, Hashem is willing to rearrange the whole world just so you can say Kaddish for your father. So maybe it'll lead you to doing more mitzvot as well. Be'ezrat Hashem. So whenever you're doubting yourself and you think, I'm such a sinner, I already did this wrong and I did that wrong. Why does Hashem even care about my davening? Just remember this biker who Hashem arranged a minion at a gas station in Italy in the middle of nowhere, just to remind him how much Hashem cares. Thank you so much for listening. As always, my sweetest friends, it's always such a pleasure for me to record the stories. Editing a little less, but the recording is always fun. And thank you for sharing, and thank you to all the supporters. I really appreciate all of the financial support and the messages and the sharing. So until next week, my sweetest friends, take care of yourselves. We should hear good news. Sei gesund.